So welcome to SINergy, the podcast for Skeptic Ink Network, a network of authors, philosophers, scientists, thinkers, activists, feminists, you name it. We're there ranting about things that we care about and generally being skeptical. This is our first podcast, and as you might have already heard, there could be some technical hitches. You know, it's life. Sorry, you're going to have to blame Google or someone. So, my name is Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and I blog at A Tippling Philosopher on the Skeptic Ink Network. And today, for this first podcast, there are three of us on a panel who are all members of the Skeptic Ink Network, or SIN, which is an appropriate acronym. The first guest, or panelist even, is Kevin McCarthy from Smilerdon's Retreats. Kevin, did you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I love science. I was not raised to be a skeptic, but I ended up becoming one after studying a lot of geology and a lot of biology, and then started applying it to everything through some rather humorous stories I'll relate later if you like. I'm an educational specialist working in assessments, specifically in science for various clients all over the U.S. So that's a little bit about me.
And what does your blog, Smilerdon's Retreat? What's your specialism really on Skeptic Ink?
I do a lot of science stuff. My first blogs was really all about evolution and creationism. And then when joining Skeptic Ink, I've been talking a lot about climate change. That's become a big thing. Genetically modified organisms, even a little bit about vaccines. You know, anything with science or technology, I like to talk about it.
Excellent stuff. Excellent. So the other panelist on the show tonight is Maria Moltseva. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. I've only said it to myself in my head before. So Maria, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am an attorney and a private piano teacher, and I blog at Skeptically Left, Skeptic Ink. And basically the main idea behind my blog is questioning my own politics, which tend to the left, and therefore I tend to be biased that way, and so I kind of want to examine my own biases a lot and discuss current issues and also see how the laws reflect where society is today.
Which is really actually brings us on to our first main feature segment for this episode, which is what is skepticism. So myself, I blog, as I said, at A Tippling Philosopher, and I deal a lot with philosophy, being a philosopher. It's pretty obvious there. So our first segment, really, which is a pretty apt opener for our first foray into the world of podcasting, is what is skepticism? So, I'll just talk a little bit about skepticism, what I think it is and what some people think it is, and we'll take it from there and just have a little bit of discussion, see what you guys feel about the topic of skepticism. So it's a sort of term, skepticism, that you hear bandied around an awful lot on the internet and in different different spheres at the moment, and sometimes I think it's problematically given as a synonym for atheism, and I think that's potentially a bit of a problem. But what is skepticism? So for me, it is doubt. It is all about doubting received knowledge, and in fact doubting everything. And I think it's important to separate skepticism, sort of academic skepticism, from ordinary incredulity. And there's one good way that the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy talks about this as a good example of showing the difference between the two, is by looking at the two films, Truman Show and The Matrix. And the Truman Show, you have this guy, Truman, who is placed inside this sort of biodome, if you like, this entire new world. And he gradually starts doubting it, and he finds this new knowledge such that his whole reality is doubted, and he comes to realize that he lives in this slightly different existence. But there's almost like something to compare his existence in that sort of biodome. There's something to compare it to. So the doubting can only go so far. He's still like a human. He's still having human interactions with these other people. There's still an element of something to compare his reality to. Whereas the Matrix is a replaying of Cartesian philosophy, René Descartes. So it was all about what in the world can we doubt. And in the Matrix, it's literally everything. You know, we've got this idea that people can be brains in vats, and we can doubt our every experience and our every part of our existence. Apart from that, we exist. So Descartes came up with cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. So he said we can doubt everything in the universe apart from the thinking entity which allows me to doubt. Okay? So I would say skepticism can go really, really far in that direction. And for me, that's what skepticism is. It's applying doubt to everything and building my picture of reality from the bottom up. It's not about building it from the top down. So, for example, sorry, yes, I was just going to...
I don't think we can ever actually get to the bottom, is the thing. I mean, it's not accessible to us. So on some level, we do accept certain things to be true in order to be able to communicate with each other.
Sure. So we accept that the outside world exists, and we have these sort of axioms that we just take for granted, and that's absolutely true. But I think it's still really important to build up our conclusions from the bottom up, because, and I think there was a group of skeptics back in Greek times called the Pyrrhonian skeptics. A guy called Sextus Empiricus sort of told us a lot about them, that they doubted everything, and they were reacting against dogmatism, right? People that were dogmatic, that would assert these kind of conclusions. And I think that's what skepticism is. I think it's about straying away from dogmatic assertions about reality and saying, you know, it's not about not being able to come to any conclusions, because actually skepticism is closely related to the verb skeptomai, which means to inquire. So it's still about inquiring, right? But it's about what is justified, and I'm going to make my justifications by building up these bricks and coming to my conclusions.
Yeah, I think you've got sort of the scientific version, but you know, I'm not trained in philosophy. I don't even think I've taken a philosophy class, so I tend to look at it from a much more pragmatic viewpoint. You know, we can question, we doubt, we analyze the evidence, and we come to some conclusion that can change, just like any scientific notion can change. But at some point, we have to say, I accept this as is for now. You know, if something else comes along and says something that disproves it or something like that, then we can change our minds. That's fine. But like kind of Maria said, you know, we have to say at some point, this is true.
Yes,
to some value.
I think there's value to keeping both of those views in mind. One, this kind of idea that we don't really know anything for certain. And that's kind of always there in the background. And then there's the practical application of skepticism, which is basically looking for evidence for the beliefs you hold. And sort of applying a simplified version of the scientific method to everyday questions.
Yeah, when I grew up in the South of the U.S., there were three kinds of people. There's Ford people, there's Dodge people, and there's Chevy people. And you know, that's what you were. Your family was Ford people, and when they needed a new car, they walked down to the Ford dealership and bought a Ford. It didn't matter if it was a crappy piece of junk compared to everything else. That's what you did. Later on, I became a skeptic and said, okay, maybe there's a better car out there. Maybe it's cheaper. And then I applied skepticism to my belief that Ford was the car. And, you know, it's that kind of practical application. Did I pick the best car? Maybe not. But it's perfectly acceptable to me right now. So.
Yeah, so I think, you know, there's a lot to be said about the scientific method as being really important to skepticism, because that's how you differentiate you know, bullshit from stuff that is justified and that we've got good rational evidence for. But being a philosopher, I would say that there are some things we need to be doubtful of that are actually quite difficult to apply the scientific method to. So, for example, quite recently I've been looking at morality and really coming to some different conclusions about what morality is.
Quagmire.
Well, yeah, that is an absolute quagmire, and the reason it's a quagmire is because it's based on these things called abstract ideas.
Right.
And so, therefore, as a philosopher and as a skeptic, I've started to, you know, I've always wanted to take it back to the bottom fundamental bricks and build up. And so, therefore, in order to find out what morality is, I need to work out what an abstract idea is. And if I then start being skeptical about whether abstract ideas exist outside of our individual brains, okay, so in philosophical terms, I'm a conceptual nominalist. I actually deny the existence of objective abstract ideas. Okay, so if I say that these things can't exist outside of our individual brains, then I have to deny some kind of objective morality, as is quite often described by certain people. So I think that, to me, is skepticism. It's saying I'm not going to even start halfway up and look at these semi-conclusions, or right at the top and look at these conclusions. I need to go back to the building bricks and build up my picture of reality from there.
And that's why I stick with the physical world, because you get humans involved and it gets all squishy and gross and stuff. And
I don't think that morality actually can be objective, and I know that philosophers do disagree with me on that. So,
and agree with you, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not really sure how the argument for an objective morality without a God figure works, or how it could work, because really we derive our morality basically from behaviors that seem beneficial to humanity as a whole and to ourselves.
Well, it's cultural. I mean, it's a cultural thing. What is moral and perfectly acceptable in one culture?
More ethics than moral.
Well,
I think
I'm not a philosopher. They're the same thing.
Yeah. To steer the discussion away from morality, because that would take hours to get to the bottom of.
Oh, but it's so fun.
Oh, it is. You know, it's the bread and butter of philosophy, for sure, and philosophers. But as far as the point being that as far as skepticism is concerned, you know, I think everything is ripe for the picking as far as being a skeptic. I think if you're a proper skeptic, going back to those, you know, those Pyrrhonian skeptics that we should be fighting dogmatism, where dogmatism is it's almost actually fighting faith, where you've got these dogmatic conclusions that are derived from, you know, a lack of evidence in some kind of way.
So let me ask you a question. If everything is ripe for picking, so for instance, would you say that something like solipsism is possible? That we really are, that the whole world could be a construct of our own imaginations?
There's a great joke about the solipsist, though. So the belief that you're the only person in the world and everything else is just a figment of your imagination. There's a great joke of this professor, this philosophy professor in a philosophy faculty, and the students. Some guy came in and said, "Oh, what's this professor over there like?" He said, "Oh, we look after him really well. You know, he's awesome. We treat him like a god around here, because if he goes, we all go." You know, like, we're all figments of his imagination, so we got to look after this dude. But yeah, basically you can, but as you are right as well, Maria, in saying that there are axioms that we kind of have to abide by if we want some kind of social cohesion. You know, if I go around thinking the whole world is just a figment of my imagination, or I've got a brain in a vat, then I don't know. I think it might be counterproductive to me having a happy, enjoyable life.
Exactly. While I can never dismiss some of these ideas, and it's funny, I had a lot of these ideas, questions that come up as you're growing up. Maybe I remember this was when I was still in Russia, so I was under 7 at some point, and always thinking about, you know, does God exist? What if the whole world is just part of my imagination? And I'm wondering if kids who are brought up without religion have all these thoughts early on in life on their own.
That would be great. That would mean they're pretty philosophically astute at a young age. That would be great.
Well, like you said, with the Matrix, I think they all kind of have the idea that that's at least possible. But the Matrix is, what, almost 20 years old now. But you know, you kind of have to say, even if we do our brains in a vat, even if we are just a simulation running on a galaxy-sized supercomputer, we do have to accept that some things are true. You know, gravity works in a certain way. You know, we have to accept that some things are true just to function.
I think
Yes,
it was
I can agree on that.
It's an interesting aside. There's a chap called Nick Bostrom who on the simulation argument, he's worked out that it's actually more probable that we're living in a simulation than we're not living in a simulation.
I've read that.
I don't know how well that stands up, but you know.
I've read that too, and I'm not sure I followed that logic completely. It's, you know, it's kind of the same question as if you're asking if there's a God, you know, then who created that God? And it's the same type of argument. You know, how did the beginning of the beginning before the beginning?
Yeah. So on the subject of skepticism, no worries. On the subject of skepticism, from our point of view, from a personal point of view, we established that we're all fairly skeptical about most things in life. What have you applied skepticism to in your personal lives recently, which has changed your opinion about something quite strongly?
Well, that's that's an easy one for me to answer, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and that's feminism. And
feminism.
Yeah, it's a large reason why I started blogging, a large reason why I took a long break, and a large reason why I went back to it. I would not consider myself a feminist at this point. But that, of course, by saying that, I'm just saying that I don't subscribe to that philosophy. it doesn't really say anything about what I believe women's rights should be. But yeah, basically taking that apart and thinking about it really carefully, I changed my views on a lot of things, I think.
So,
Yeah.
Kevin, how about yourself? What has drawn you to be more skeptical recently?
Well, not necessarily recently. I've been doing skepticism without realizing that I've been doing skepticism a lot, but one of the reasons I'm a big proponent of understanding climate change is I originally didn't believe it. I was like, that's ridiculous, and I had all the same stupid arguments about climate change, and I started actually reading about them, researching the various arguments for and against, and I changed my mind. And the evidence is clear, and I couldn't not accept that evidence just because of my personal belief. Fairly recently.
What originally? Why did you deny climate change?
Probably mostly my upbringing. I mean, I'm the first person in my family in 100 years to not work in a petrochemical refinery.
Right. There's an irony there.
Yeah, there's my family is deeply Republican. Very much. This world is ours, and we're going to do with it as we please, kind of people. And finally, I just couldn't accept that just without evidence anymore. I'd already changed my mind about evolution, in my mid-teens after doing a lot of research and studying on that. Now climate change, and lately I've been changing my mind on gun control and the aspects of gun violence and things like that. My family has always had firearms. I've got in my closet right now is probably 25,000 rounds of ammunition.
I think gun control is a two-pronged issue. One is an issue of rights, and the other issue is an issue of general safety.
It is, and like I said, it's hard to grow up with that background where, hey, let's go out shooting for the weekend, and we would go camp and just blow pine cones away for hours, and into this mode where it's all of a sudden becoming real, thinking, is there really a reason to even have these things? What's the point? My family has had concealed carry licenses for 35 years now. No one has ever pulled a gun for any reason.
I think that goes back to this idea that you had this conclusion up here again. It's all about bottom up against top down for me. So this idea that you had these conclusions, and then the realization that, and I found this very powerful, when I realized, decades ago that certain of my opinions I've just received from my parents or from the environment around me, and that it's knocking that down as being a tower, indefensible tower, because we need to build up our conclusions from the evidence and go where the evidence leads us, the rational evidence leads us, and just to hold on to these conclusions because they fit with your politics or because they fit with this and that is not justifiable. You end up being dogmatic and unjustified dogmatic, which is what skepticism, I think, is designed to fight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that I have any conclusions that I consider, absolutely set in stone. And I mean, I'm probably more set in my ways now than I've ever been. So I've usually gone from a place of not knowing to actually holding some belief, rather than having some belief and then doing away with it and having a new one take its place. And even the beliefs I currently hold, someone can persuade me. I mean, if someone can show me evidence that there's a God, I'll believe in God.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and so that's how it should be, absolutely.
And that's just the opposite for me. I was always, in my teens, was very dogmatic, very, well, this is the way it is. Even though I was doing science, I didn't accept the skepticism and the evidence, and finally I just started doing it, and I'm less dogmatic about anything now. I try to be. That's you can't.
It's funny. I'm more probably.
You
Because
just
for me, it was a world of what ifs.
hmm But it's just skepticism, and one of the things I like to blog about is using skepticism daily. I mean, we're talking morality and these big, huge, massive conclusions and these ideas, but they don't have to be that way.
Take a moment.
I like to think about skepticism and training people in some easy way. Like that Ford Chevy thing. There's lots of people out there, and I've talked to them who say, hey, I love chocolate ice cream. That's great. How many other flavors have you tried? None. Well, go be skeptical. Go try all those other flavors of ice cream. And if you can get people to sort of think in that skeptical mode about things like ice cream and cars and product purchases, then you start them thinking on this road to analyzing everything. And that's really where the value of skepticism is to me, again, being practical, just not making bad decisions. You can use skepticism on TV advertisements and diet choices and everything else, and you don't have to just go with what everybody says just because your friend's friend, brother's cousin's uncle says it. You can do your own research and learn things and be skeptical and be okay.
I think it's interesting in the sense that right now we probably have access to more information than we have ever had due to the internet, and therefore we have the ability to learn so much on our own, and yet so many people don't really use the internet for that.
Yeah.
Its most common uses, I think, are cats and porn.
Yeah. Damn, you found me out. But yeah, so and that's quite interesting actually, because if we move away from talk about what skepticism is onto our next segment, that's a good segue into the segment, because we're talking about persuasion and trying to persuade people away from any given position. And in fact, welcome to Beth, one of the panelists here, who has just joined us. So we've just talked about what skepticism is, and we've discussed about skepticism being the idea of building our reality from the bottom up, so that we don't start with conclusions and then just go on from there, that we actually build up to our conclusions. And Maria was talking about how she brought in the idea of persuasion, and I thought that was a good point to bring to the next segment, and you've come online at just the right time, because you and Maria are going to talk to us a little bit about moving towards a secular society, but in the context of persuading others online through blogging and through other methods. So do you want to, Beth, first of all, explain or introduce yourself, explain who you are and where you blog, and then talk a little bit to us about your segment?
Yes, I write at Incongruent Elements. If you see, it's written on the bottom of my little spiel there. I write a lot of, I've been a writer since 1995, a publisher since 2001, and one of my favorite quotes is by a famous copywriter by the name of John Carlton, who wrote the famous one-legged golfer ad, who said that the greatest persuasion happens with the juxtaposition of incongruent elements. And I just love that so much. So that's where that comes from. And we just came from TAM, and a perfect example of an incongruent element is when James Randi's new movie is called An Honest Liar. Kaboom, incongruent element right there. So that's
nice. Nice.
One thing that I find utterly fascinating about the skeptic community is that we tend to be really stupid persuaders, in that we do a lot of trying to appeal to the intellect and things like that, and we look down on the emotional aspect of it, whereas a lot of persuasion is done on the emotional level, and people tend to use facts and figures to, and statistics and such to back up those emotional claims. And so I always find it interesting, when we have all these people chit-chatting about all these subjects, and we tend to be really
interesting, because it ties in exactly with what I was going to talk about, how arguments basically can be presented at 3 levels, or there's reason, there's ethics, and finally there's an appeal to emotion. And my feeling is that a lot of blogging that's done focuses too much on appeals to emotion, not enough on facts and evidence, and not enough of just taking the other person in good faith, whoever your opponent or reader may be.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you're communicating like your distaste for somebody, you're going to lose that person as a potential ally. And as soon as you call somebody stupid, that's it.
Yes.
You've lost that person.
Right, and it's really, the appeal to emotions is so incredibly powerful, and it's unfortunate that's the way we're built, evidently. But we are very emotional, and it's incredibly effective, and it needs to be very careful, because a lot of people use the emotional attack and the emotional charge
Mm-hmm.
to get the blog hits, to get the traffic, and to get heard, because it is so incredibly effective, and it's used in a very bad way. It can be used in good ways as well. Even when you think about, for example, religion, it's built upon a fear of hell. And sometimes it's built on greed, in that, if I can be this particular religion, God will bless me, I'm going to get rich and famous, and I'll have all my wildest dreams will come true, and it's a real fascinating study.
Well, Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist, has talked about sort of changing people's minds, and lots of research has been done into changing people's minds, and we're in the business, really, aren't we, if we're to be blatantly honest, of yeah, we're cutting our teeth in blogging and putting posts out there, but ideally we want to be interacting with the people that we disagree with. We put our opinions out there, and the idea is that we're going to change their minds, because at the end of the day we believe we're right. As individual writers, we all believe we rationally hold our opinions, whether it be on philosophy, politics, or whatever. We think we're right, because if we didn't, then we wouldn't hold those opinions.
I disagree with myself, so occasionally I'll think one thing today and something else tomorrow.
I have to agree with you. I like to think all of my beliefs are totally rational and such, but that's not necessarily the case. And I'm willing to change my mind based on evidence. And another thing, I'm not out to change people's minds. I'm out to plant seeds. Because you're not going to, some of these beliefs are so ingrained that you will never, ever change them. I just want you planting that seed and watering it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So what I was going to come on to was the fact that although we want to change people's minds, I think a lot of us know that actually what we do isn't a very good way of changing people's minds. So there's lots of research to show that the more that you present someone with rational evidence, the more you'll entrench them in their original view, which your rational evidence completely contradicts. But so therefore, and I say when I go out and do public talks on free will or on the nativity or anything, if there are Christians or other theists in the audience, I will say, thank you for coming, but I'm not going to change your mind. In fact, all I'm going to do here by presenting this evidence is entrench you in your original belief far more.
Yeah.
So what the problem is, and what makes the job harder is the idea that changing people's minds is a very psychological affair, and how best do we do that? And Jonathan Haidt would say that we need to, like someone riding an elephant, you need to come up alongside them on your own elephant and just nudge them ever so slightly the other way, change their direction slightly bit by bit.
You just
Right.
did a real interesting persuasional technique right there. When you tell people right away, I'm not going to persuade you, you kind of put them off balance, and when they're off balance, that's actually an easier time to persuade them.
Genius.
Yeah, I agree. Also, you kind of, I don't like the idea of teaching, you know, this is how it is. You want people to draw their own conclusions and to kind of reach them on their own, because if that doesn't happen, it's just dogma that they're picking up. Even if it is what you consider to be true, for them, it's them agreeing with you, not because
you're absolutely right. But
through the process, and they can tomorrow agree with somebody else because they're more persuasive, can use those appeals to emotion better.
it's like Beth said, if you plant the seed. I have a very close theistic theologian friend who used to deny evolution, and I for ages would give argument against this denial, you know, for evolution. And he went away, and in his own time he emailed Simon Conway Morris, a theistic evolutionary biologist at Oxford or Cambridge somewhere, who presented my friend with exactly the same arguments, but it was on my friend's own terms that he garnered that information, took it on board, came back, and eventually changed his mind. And it wasn't me that did it, like with all the evidence. It was well, I may have sowed that seed, as Beth said, for him to go away and water it himself.
Right, and I think if you're gonna try to change people's minds, it's best done that way. It shouldn't be a heavy-handed, you know, you're an idiot, you won't fit in with our clique, women are suffering all over the place because of your beliefs, and, you know, that kind of...
The other side of that is that, to be perfectly honest, it takes a great deal of mental and emotional strength to take these deeply held beliefs that someone has had and crush them up and toss them away on evidence. And I don't know if everyone has that ability. They probably do intrinsically, but they've had it beaten out of them by their family, their religion, their school system, or whatever. It takes a great deal of effort to do this, and there's not a lot of people who are interested in putting that forth that effort.
I'm not sure that it's necessarily so good to completely
No, I'm not saying
worldview like that.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. Again, that's my personal belief, and and I deal with a very specific subset of various communities, and that's being the creationists. And these a lot of how I think and why I think has been influenced by dealing with them on a, you know, very deep level for the last 20 years. And so that influences how I think about other skeptics or other non-skeptics, whatever it is we're talking about. So, you know, you take what I say with that grain of salt. But
I think in the creation-evolution debate, the problem is that there is always head-on, like two sort of butting animals just like smacking heads together to try and get some kind of end result, and it's very rare that you get a creationist or an evolutionist just suddenly go, oh yeah, you know, you're right, those arguments, damn it, I was wrong all the time.
Those are pointless a lot of the time, and therefore I don't engage in them because I know I'm not going to change anybody's mind, and also I know that whatever I have to say on this issue has been already said a million times in books and videos, and for, you know, actually hundreds of years.
And that's true enough, but there is one. I mean, it's true of any science that people are dogmatically against. You know, especially climate change, which has real massive implications. And there are people that I have over decades dealt with and caused them to rethink their position.
Climate change is far more important and far more pressing to get people to believe and to get, you know, the government to accept to some extent, and because the government is so influenced by corporate interests, at least in America it is, that there's always going to be a big wall there. People are interested in their bottom lines and their stocks, and that's what we're really arguing against when we're talking about climate change. It's not some fundamental life belief or philosophy. It's something practical, and something needs to be done. And that, I feel, is worth arguing for passionately and trying to change minds, because nobody will have anything left if something isn't done.
So, Kevin, have you had any successes, and if so, how did that come about in convincing someone otherwise on the topic of climate change?
I can't point to one person and say I changed this guy's mind. I can mention a couple of people that I've talked to for a long time, and you know, when you just start talking, and this is kind of bothers me because I like to talk about science, but when you start just talking about real things, not, well, you know, this model says this and this model says this, and you know, all this sciencey stuff, but you just say, look, in the last 20 years, all of the top 20 years of the highest temperatures have been in the last 20 years. And when you just start saying them simply and you know, coming up with instead of these big elaborate graphs and charts and everything, just these simple statements like that, it kind of makes people stop and think, because it's not. Part of the problem with science is that we tend to be both arrogant and we like to hear ourselves talk. I do. I have that problem right now. And we use these big, giant, sciencey words, and we scare people who have had maybe high school chemistry and high school biology and maybe nothing else. And, you know, like Neil deGrasse Tyson's Last Cosmos, I didn't like it very much. I didn't enjoy the show. I didn't think it was very well presented. But everyone else loved it because he wasn't trying to be this arrogant scientist. He wasn't trying to show all these charts and graphs. He was just talking about things, and it works that way. And,
so Beth, what your going back to what you were saying about how best to persuade people, what would your top tips be for persuading people effectively?
Ironically, I would say, you know, in a conversation back and forth, listen more than you speak. And when you do speak, just ask a lot of questions. Oh dear, sorry about that. I'll just ask a lot of questions. You know, ask more questions than pontificating. If a person feels as though you're listening to them, and you are really listening to them, a lot of the walls go down. And just by asking some honest questions, you know, well, what do you suppose is going to happen, you know, with the climate, or, you know, how do you think this works, and, you know.
So it very much sounds like a sort of Socratic dialectic method.
Possibly, I have no idea, and I'm not a scientist either, and I wouldn't even. It's easy for me to ask questions because I actually have questions.
So Socrates, back in obviously ancient Greek times, is famous for winning arguments, but based not on sort of rational presentation of.
That's how they teach in law school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Everything is done through the Socratic method. You never get, you know, the flat out, this is what the law is. You get asked questions about various cases.
Is that the same reason that conspiracy theorists are so conspiracy theorists, because they think they figured something out on their own that no one else has, and they think they're special because of that? You know, you asked that.
There's a lot of interesting studies about why conspiracy theories exist. Don't think we can cover all of them.
Well, here's my take on it. I have an actual family member who is an expert in the Bible, and he has no education. He learned everything just from reading his Bible, and he's in his circle thought really highly because he's a scholar. They think of him as a scholar, and when that's the only thing you really have to hang your hat on, you know, it's at least something. And if, well, I did my research on the internet, and now I know this, and this. That's a big wall to get through, you know, to be able to present, well, look at this side of the story, look at this side of the issue, and, you know, to start aiming them and realizing that, you know, maybe that really colorful website you read just might not be totally accurate.
And I think, you know, this is where the questioning method comes in. Yeah, the Socratic method of just, you know, question after question after question, and getting the person to realize on their own terms, you know, the kind of light bulb switches on when they realize, oh yeah, actually, yeah, just by you asking that question, I've realized that I don't have an adequate answer for that.
In law school, they have a particularly cruel way of doing that, is by calling on you at random when you may not have an answer, and so you're stuck sitting there going, what was that again?
Yeah. So
not exactly committed to deep thought.
So the idea is that
the idea is good.
Well, with beliefs, holding a belief is a very psychological affair, and so changing someone's belief is an equally psychological affair. So in our business of blogging and perhaps either implicitly or explicitly trying to change people's beliefs on the issues that we write about, we need to be, in some sense, armchair psychologists, possibly,
yes.
to try and get our points across effectively.
I was going to say, probably the first step to that is to be aware of who you're writing for. That is, know what your target audience is, and probably the second step is to establish some sort of common beliefs and common ground with that audience, so that they're more receptive to your ideas. Now, mind you, I say all that, I don't always do it.
No. No, that's absolutely right. So you want to be, basically, in psychological terms, inviting the people into your in-group before you pick on the one thing that makes them an out-group member and show them that that's wrong. But there's enough comfort in your commonality, as you say, that allows them to feel comfortable in then maybe accepting that and changing their minds.
I have a question, if I may. We're getting real, you know, theoretical right here, and I would be real interested in each person in the panel talking about a wrong belief that you had, how you gave it up, and how you felt when you realized you were wrong.
I'm not aware I've ever been wrong.
We sort of did that. We kind of went through that a little bit before you got here, Beth.
Okay.
And I was talking about some beliefs I had about feminism that I didn't list them specifically, but that I'm certainly thinking about differently now after having researched it for years than I did at first. But since I never really hold very strong, committed beliefs, there isn't something that's been like, wow, night and day. I mean, I may have believed that a word meant something, and then someone showed me in the dictionary that it meant something else, and, well, I had to agree. You know, that's pretty much the level of importance that the beliefs I've changed throughout my life.
So how do you relate to people who have deep-seated beliefs then? You know, how do you relate? I mean, I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of our beliefs are emotional things. And so I feel lots of things are right because I feel about them, I guess. Like, for instance, I can argue for left politics. But why? Why do I lean to the left? Because I want to see everyone happy and everyone have a slice of the pie and everyone be able to succeed in life. But why is that a good thing? You know, is there some reason to say that that's the best way for the world to be? I can't really provide that reason. So I have to realize that my politics then are sort of emotionally grounded. On the other hand, if we're talking about something like climate change, well, where you can see disaster for everyone, you can talk about it with much more conviction and really say, well, you know, this is something that needs to be fixed. When you argue economic policy, there's so many diverse beliefs and no one really truly knows what is right. And there are lots of people who believe they're right, but you know, all I can do is speculate and kind of lean to the left, which is what I do.
So Beth, have you changed your opinion drastically on any particular thing, and how did that come about?
I really have, but I want to hear your story first.
Well, myself, most of mine haven't been like life-changing events, even though the topics that I've changed my mind on are absolutely huge. So, for example, when I realised that we didn't have free will in a philosophical sense, you know, that's a huge thing to come to suddenly realise. But actually, it's not that I thought we had free will before, it's just I hadn't necessarily thought about it. You just take these things for granted. But this ability to do otherwise in any given situation, I came to deny, and that's changed the way I feel about, you know, lots of other things that rely on that, and it makes the idea of God completely nonsensical, at least a judgmental God. And so, but I came about that, again, through my own thinking, through talking to people, through philosophy groups, and there was no difficulty in doing it. And even my rejection of God, I had a nominal belief as a youngster, and my parents are nominally religious, if at all. And so therefore, you know, rejecting God wasn't particularly a difficult thing. So none of the things I've had to do have had ramifications, which actually is interesting in itself, because it means it's easier for me to change. I haven't been socially conformed to be dogmatically attached to any given worldview or belief, so I can kind of flip and change at will, and it's on its own terms, on its own merits. So I don't know if I qualify as being an interesting case. Kevin, is there anything that you would particularly change? You talked about climate change earlier, but how did that come about?
Well, it came about because I don't like being wrong. And I really don't like being wrong in public. And, you know, once you, and it was a long process, you know, lots of reading, lots of research, lots of figuring things out. And it wasn't this, all of a sudden, I woke up one morning and said, you know, hey, climate really is changing. It's just this subtle change over many months of research and studying that led me to change my mind. But there was one thing that I changed my mind on fairly recently and had a rather dramatic impact, and it was my political position, which has shifted much more from right to left, and that impact, that change, has caused me to basically lose my dad. So these kinds of changes, and you know, when I was talking about the cognitive difficulty and emotional strength, you know, when you make a decision towards something like that, and your family is directly against you, you know, it does have an impact. And I haven't spoken to my dad in over 3 years now. that wasn't the sole cause of the event, but it was a big factor. And I don't know. It's like I said, not my personality. I don't like to be wrong, and I tend to do things much slower. I was once rather publicly embarrassed by some other bloggers who I greatly respected because I posted about something and they laughed at me rather significantly for it. So now, something comes out on the news, you will not see a blog post from me about it for weeks, maybe, until I see evidence, I see people who I know and trust commenting on it with some kind of evidential support. I just posted about the big holes that were found in Siberia yesterday, and they've been going on. They've been happening for weeks now. So, that's where I'm coming from on things like that. I have a weird personality.
That's really interesting. Thanks.
I can so easily relate to what Jonathan says because that's kind of how I feel about free will as well, and kind of how I got there as well. It wasn't like a realization, or I read something at one point. It was just I've always wondered about it, and then there was a tipping point where I kind of thought it's more likely than not that we don't have free will in the way people generally think of it. I probably won't argue for certain that we don't, because I just don't do that in general, unless I'm writing a paper where you really have to. So I still have some doubt, but I generally feel the same way. But I haven't had these life-changing beliefs ever, because I've never really believed in God. I went from being kind of agnostic to my own version of Pascal's wager to being atheist because there's no evidence, and any kind of God that we can define becomes pretty much by definition inconsistent with what we know of the world. So that seems to be the logical conclusion, and that's where I am right now.
Cool. And Beth, finally to yourself.
My stories are not nearly as highbrow as yours. I worked for 2 years for one of the largest metaphysical universities in the world. You may all bow now. And when I began to realize that maybe their classes on astral projection and angels and dolphin communication and things like that might not be totally accurate, I began to have quite a few questions. But the straw that broke the camel's back was when in 2012 the head of the college moved to Ecuador and wanted us all to go there and sell all our possessions and turn it into gold, and I was supposed to carry the gold. And I told her I was going to hold down the fort, and I lost my job. I was their PR person, so I have much to atone for. But, in going back to our original question about persuasion, one of the things we have to do as persuaders is we have to somehow if we do take something away from somebody, you have to give them something back that's better than what you're taking away. And so when you're dealing with, metaphysics, for example, you got comfort, people, a group, an in-group, you feel comfortable because you have all this protection from angels and UFOs if they're friendly. And, you're in the in-group and all this kind of stuff. So, I've always wondered, from a persuasion standpoint, and being a skeptic myself, I don't proclaim any other label besides that. What are we offering that's better? If we're going to take away beliefs, or, if you're going to convince someone that global climate change is real, you're taking away some of their expert authority. What are you giving them back in return other than, boy, you were wrong?
That's a really interesting point. Really interesting, and doubly so because people hold beliefs generally because they want to. So
right.
Not only
you're humiliated when you realize I believed that for a while, and no, dang it, I was so stupid. What are you giving up?
Often a belief that they want to believe, and therefore has that kind of desire aspect. So if you're saying what you believe is wrong, but you really want to believe that as well, and you're still wrong. You know.
You have a community of people even sometimes, you know, and then like Kevin was saying, you have the possibility of losing family members. Oh dear God, really? What, why do we do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because reality, as horrible and as tragic and as amazing and as beautiful and as weird as it is still cooler than anything that we've made up before or since.
But where's the proof for that?
Oh,
well, it's all personal.
It's real.
I can look at some chemical equations that describe how nucleic acids are grown or developed from non-organic material and think, damn, that's the coolest thing ever. Why would you care if Xenu or whatever came down and snapped his fingers and poof, we had life on the planet? When look at, I mean, you could go out and get some test tubes and some chemicals and do this yourself.
Yeah, but Kevin, the problem is, mate. Thor has a hammer, so whatever. Right, so I was just going to say, if we can just probably finish that segment on persuasion, although I think it's something that we're going to have to come back to because it is a huge topic and it's something that we're all involved in doing in some not insignificant way, hopefully. But thank you, that's a really interesting segment on persuasion.
I love Beth's question. I think we have to come back to that at some point. What do we offer in return for somebody giving up?
That is really, really, really good, and I think that's most a whole show on what we're offering, in return.
Right, because that is really fundamental, and it was just an excellent point. I just wanted to reiterate it.
And I've never really thought about it in quite that way, but yes, that is very cool. That is a very important point.
Big up to the Beth.
Yeah, I want to say that one of the reasons that I'm going to mention another blogging network, not negatively or positively or anything, but if you think about free thought blogs and the way they function, they do actually offer something in return for giving up your beliefs in whatever it is. And that is a very cohesive sort of community structure. We don't have that, and I don't think we should, personally. So if we don't have that, what else can we offer?
Good question.
Good question. One to return to.
Yeah.
So just before we finish off, we're going to have a short science segment from Kevin. So Kevin on his science and science news.
Okay, one thing that I've always found in science is that people who aren't into it every single day are 10, 15, 20 years behind the times. When I was growing up, we had these dinosaurs and their tails dragged on the ground, and they were big, lumbering, cold-blooded critters. But even the scientists of the time in the mid-70s were discovering that they were warm-blooded and that they had feathers and that they were very active creatures. And one thing that I've learned recently and realized has been going on for quite some time in the scientific community is the idea of a new human-centered geologic era. And so I wanted to show this little graphic right here, and I hope everybody can see it. It's the geologic timescale, starting over here in the bottom right with the formation of the planet, and in the upper left where we are right now. And that little bitty word under epoch, under the Cenozoic, is the Holocene. And that is where we've been living for the last 10,000 years. But there's a drive in the geologic community now to call it something else. The belief among scientists, and I say belief, evidence-centered belief, is that we've entered a new geologic era called the Anthropocene. And this is an era where humans have fundamentally altered the physical environment to the point where we basically created a new type of, not a new type of Earth, but a new system, on Earth. Humans have radically altered our atmosphere in the last 150 odd years since the Industrial Revolution. There's been some recent discoveries on the Hawaiian Islands of rocks, igneous rocks, that are embedded with plastics. So the plastic is not just a lump in this rock. The plastics and the igneous rocks, like granites and things, are one solid unit that are evenly mixed. Humans have caused massive extinctions. Everything from most of the large fauna in North America to the passenger pigeon and lots of island-based mammals, especially small mammals. You bring a pair of cats onto a small island and they can destroy the bird and rodent population in years. So this is sort of a new thing. We have, depending on when the geologists and the ecologists decide to put a timestamp on this new Anthropocene date, we very well may have lived through two geologic eras in time, the Holocene and the Anthropocene. So we're literally on the cusp of a new era in Earth's history.
One way to look at it would be that as we look back at other geological eras, so we would say, look, that's a Jurassic era, that's a Triassic era, or whatever, and the markers for that are this and this and this property. Would we or some human in 50,000, 100,000 years' time be able to look back on our time now and find ample evidence to show that the properties of this time are significantly different from the properties of another era? And you would probably say that given the change that we've done to this world, there would be ample evidence.
Well, sure, and not in just things like foundations of houses and major buildings that are these large lumps of concrete, but extinctions, the loss of the ice sheets. The Weather Channel has a fascinating slideshow on some pictures that have been taken from 1923 to 1950 in Alaska, and then pictures today of what that area looks like. And there will be one picture from 1923, and all you see is hundreds of meters of ice. And the next picture is from the exact same spot, and it is, this beautiful pine forest with a lake. There's no ice anywhere in evidence. So, yes, changing the soils, changing the rocks, deforestation even is visible, will be visible in the future. So yeah, I think there's a good case to be made for some time, between roughly 1950 and maybe 2100, that there's a good case for a significant change on our planet.
I think, first of all, I think that's extremely interesting, and I think that's very much likely to be true. Human beings have been a significant event on this planet, one of the most significant. But in a sense, we're just yet another natural event, like a meteorite, only one that takes a lot of time to destroy rather than...
That's really interesting, actually, because I've often talked before about this term unnatural as actually...
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing, is there? Because everything that humans do, we're a natural sort of species, and what we do, we are using tools just like chimpanzees might use rudimentary tools. It's just that our tools are freaking brilliant, right? And they can do shed loads of cool stuff, and also shed loads of damage. But it's all still natural.
Yes.
The elephants in Africa are actually also great changers of their environment. Several herds of elephants can go through and destroy a forest in a year, but their population hasn't increased quite like humans, and humans are these amazing tool-using creatures that have no idea what they're doing. This is going back to my personal beliefs. We have exceeded the technology has exceeded our ability for wisdom, our knowledge, our wisdom, and we're just doing things because we can, and like Maria said, to make a profit, to make ourselves feel better, to make ourselves happier.
There's no general intellect in a group, I guess, whereas individuals can be very bright and can have a lot of foresight. Once you have a group, it's really, really difficult to get the answer, I guess, scientifically right.
Well, and once you start learning, if you have a dog, you have to train it to do whatever you want it to do, and then when that dog has puppies, you have to train that dog to do whatever you want it to do. Humans aren't like that. We have these things called books, and one human can make a gun or a car and then give it to another human in exchange for something, and the person who received this gift may not have any knowledge of how it works. Go to an 8th grade class and ask them how a cell phone works. You will be shocked. They don't have a clue. They don't know anything about radio. They don't know anything about electrons and computers. Some of them will, and like Maria said, some of them will, but as a group, not a chance.
And it's interesting. I mean, I think we're all for a democracy, but if you really think about it, what do we really get out of a democracy when we have such an uneducated voter base?
Don't get me started on. I would raise the voting age in the UK at least anyway.
I would require some sort of testing, literacy testing and a knowledge of history and other things, and understanding of science as well, because really, if you have somebody making decisions on something they know nothing about, what is that vote worth? But when I question something that fundamental, does that make me some sort of heretic? I don't know.
Probably. But thank you for that, Kevin. That's really interesting, actually, something that I didn't know about before reading up a little bit on it earlier, and how new that term Anthropocene is, and the fact that we may be on the cusp of, albeit just an abstract label for a time. And really, as humans, we can do what we like with abstract labels, and if we want to term...
I was wondering if someone was going to bring up that this could just be an abstract label, and
it's actually, in evolution, this is called the problem of species, whereby there's a continuum of species from the beginning to the end, and say you found a skull around, the cusp mark between one species of hominid and another species, you get paleontologists arguing that it's this species, and other ones arguing that that species, and of course all scientists have done have put this arbitrary line down in time-wise and said this is one species and that's the other, but there's labels that humans have created and made up, and this goes back to the earlier point in the program about conceptual nominalism, this idea that abstract labels are only sort of useful tools that we use in our own individual heads.
Yeah, you can't go through. Now, there are some points where you can kind of say there was a massive event here, the KT extinction, this meteorite crashing down. But even that, the extinction still took another million or so years. So, yeah, humans like to put labels on things. We like to put things in boxes. And the reality just is we can't do that very well. It just doesn't work.
Well,
But
it's done for pragmatic purposes. I mean, these labels don't exist objectively, you know.
as long as everyone agrees what the purpose is and why the label is there and what it means. You know, like you said, that I don't even want to get into the whole species concept. I could do a whole lecture on that. So, but yeah, at some point, some geologists and some scientists are going to sit down and say, okay, we're going to call this the Anthropocene, and the line is 1950.
Yeah.
And that's a reasonable line, but it's just a line. That's all it is.
Sounds reasonable to me. Thank you for that segment. That's really interesting. And just before we close, just to say that Skeptic Ink Network at the moment do have a book out, 13 Reasons to Doubt, which is a book about doubting, has 13 chapters from some of the contributors at Skeptic Ink Network. It's available on ebook, soon to come out on paperback, so please grab yourself a copy of 13 Reasons to Doubt.
I heard
cheeky
that
promotion.
the publisher is pretty awesome. Can you tell us about the publisher?
Publishers, I think it's one of the greatest skeptical publishers on earth. One of the imprint's onus books is a skeptical imprint with a few authors on the books, and they have stepped in and picked up the publication of 13 Reasons to Doubt. And what a good job too. So
you're not going to say the name of the publisher.
Yeah, onus books.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good.
The greatest publisher on earth. But pick up a copy, please do. He said, with no vested interest. Excellent. So please, everybody, check out these Skeptic Ink Networks. Check out all the bloggers on the panel today. In future episodes, this has been a test episode, so there will be teething problems that we'll iron out. But please check out future episodes where there'll be a range of different panelists as we try and rotate the panelists on SINergy. But until that time, that's goodbye from me. And a goodbye from the Skeptic Ink Network. Music used under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Tunes by Lino Rise Media and Longitude, including channel intros, Russia and Iceland.